joining us live. Make sure, as always, put some chats at us. We love to hear from you guys. But Johnny, it is another official visit weekend for Penn State, and this is a big one. I mean, if you look at it, kind of just on the big picture, it's a lot of already committed guys. You say, well, there might not be a whole lot of movement this weekend in terms of commits and whatnot. But this weekend is always one of the most important ones for Penn State because you get these guys on campus, you get all these committed guys together, and there are just like one or two guys that they always sprinkle into this weekend every year that they're really trying to work on to get there. And that is, again, the case this year. Of course, we'll get to that, once we dive a little bit more into this weekend. But it's the committed guys official visit weekend this weekend. All 17 guys slated to be here. And it's going to be an interesting one. But first things first, Johnny, how we doing? How's the week been? Kicking off summer after Memorial Day. Hope you've been well, buddy.
I've been good, man. I've been doing well. And yeah, you mentioned, week after Memorial Day, short week. We love to have it. Bob and I recorded on Tuesday instead of our normal Monday podcast. We decided to enjoy the holiday as most others did as well. Yep. And we talked a lot, more about, this team coming up in 2025 on that show. And not as much about recruiting, leaving recruiting kind of for this podcast ahead of, like you mentioned, Max, like another official visit weekend. Penn State have already had one. It was the weekend before Memorial Day weekend. They had Joey O'Brien on campus, Dorian Barney, Kari Adams, three really big names in the secondary that they're looking to bring on board into this 2026 recruiting class. But some obvious needs still, in the trenches and elsewhere in this class, which we will be talking about in great detail on this podcast. And like you mentioned, this is the committed, the 16, it was 17 guys. There might be one or two that might not be there this weekend, but most, if not all, of the commitments will be on campus this weekend. And that's a part of just James Franklin and his staff shoring that up, making sure there's no surprises, no flips, no turns, no nothing there. Yeah. And then, a smattering, a small group of uncommitted prospects will also be on hand. And then, they've got two more official visit weekends beyond this, into June. And, Penn State's class, like we mentioned, 17 guys in there right now, number 4 in the nation by 24/7 Sports. We'll see where it ends up, but some needs still to be addressed in this class, Max.
Yeah, absolutely. We might have some breaking news here, Johnny, as we are here live on the Blue-White Breakdown. The Penn State whiteout for 2025 season has officially been announced as Oregon. So wow. This is big time. I mean, this is not.
I'll show you my phone. It's just showing the X notifications. Yep. But it's just saying notification. It doesn't tell me what's. So I was blind. I'm still. That's brutal. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And we're live. Like in any other scenario, we'd be like, all right, let's hop off. Let's start the recording later. One of us will hop on it. But hey, we do it live. Let's talk about it.
We do it live. Let's talk about it. We'll get to the recruiting in a little bit. We do it live. Yeah, the whiteout is against Oregon, Johnny. I think that. Look, this is. Let me make sure. They've also announced the kick times for the first 3 weeks of the season. So here's the full release that we've received so far.
Okay.
Season opener versus Nevada, 3:30 p.m. kickoff on CBS. FIU noon, Big Ten Network. Villanova 3:30 on FS1, and then you get Oregon, the big one, on September 27th at 7:30 p.m. on NBC. So it is officially a night game. It will be the whiteout. And then the only other thing we've got so far is October 11th versus Northwestern is one of those little, 3-piece options, a noon, 3:30, or 4 p.m. Won't be a night game, but it will be, afternoon. Oregon is the whiteout. We weren't necessarily expecting this news today. This is, I guess it's around the time that it's come in the past few years. Last year was a little later, but it is a night game. I think this game should have been a whiteout regardless of whether it was a night game. We saw against SMU last year that, a day whiteout isn't ideal, but it can work. And like Oregon is just far and away the best home opponent on this year's schedule. We've known this for a long time. And so I think that this is a win for Penn State, certainly, to have it as a night game, especially when you've still got good weather at the end of September, realistically. And it should be a fun one. I mean, we're talking about recruiting, the recruiting opportunity against maybe the best recruiting program in the Big Ten right now, if not Ohio State and Oregon. To showcase that against a team like that, there's going to be hundreds of recruits on campus. This is what I would say hoped for, because it's the biggest opponent on the schedule, but it's big news for it to be out here right now.
It is, yeah, and it's one of those where, God, I'm still. How does this happen when we, like, minutes after we hit record?
Yeah,
Oh well,
we're 6 minutes into the recording, Johnny.
I know, and I think Penn State put it out 5 minutes ago, so it literally happened within a minute of us hitting record. But hey, really good for Penn State, like you mentioned. I think this is perhaps a product of James Franklin clamoring and Pat Kraft clamoring, whether it was in public or behind closed doors, about how they want the best opponents for a whiteout, but they also want the best conditions, being a night game. And NBC getting this game. We know Fox's first pick when it comes to that draft in terms of the Big Ten partners, Fox, CBS, NBC. So it doesn't seem like this was picked by Fox this weekend. But Penn State gets its way in a good way, and it's one of those where I agree in that, like, the whiteout could have worked for Ohio State if they wanted to do it noon last year. I think it certainly got in Kevin Jennings' head and SMU's offense's head during the CFP first round. But the whiteout belongs at night. I'm in firm belief of that. And the fact that Penn State gets its Big Ten championship rematch. I know Oregon is a very different team. They had a lot of guys go to the draft, including their 17th year starting quarterback Dylan Gabriel. So it's going to be a different team out there. But still, early in the season at this point, late September, both Penn State and Oregon, and way too early top 25s, are firmly inside the top 10. I mean, this is looking like a top 10 matchup in one of the games of the college football season. And so, for it to be a whiteout is a really big deal. It's a really big deal for Penn State in terms of giving them a competitive advantage of winning one of their two biggest games on the regular season schedule. And then also just, there's going to be a lot of eyes on this game, just nationally. As we try to sift through the national title contender credentials of Penn State and Oregon. I know it's early in the season, and, Ohio State went out to Oregon and lost in the regular season, and then smoked him in the Rose Bowl and won the national title. So, a regular season big time matchup like this doesn't mean everything in the world, but it certainly means something as we try to assess these two teams, and more specifically for us, Penn State.
I think this is a really interesting game for a lot of reasons for me, because it's really the first test that Penn State has. Like, with all due respect to FIU, Nevada, and Villanova, Penn State is going to win each of those games by 40, and Drew Aller probably isn't going to get hit a single time in any of those games. Like, those are factors when you get a team that is probably going to be in the top 10, top 15 at the end of the year coming to your place before you've really played anybody or had any adversity to that point. Like, it can be a little bit more difficult. They're going to have to be on their A game against Oregon, and it'll be a real show of just how good this team can be in 2025. And it comes fast, which is huge. But you also, I think about this, like, obviously, we had the unofficial whiteout that really ended up being pretty good against Illinois last year. And Illinois was a solid team, but it's been quite a while since, like you said, Johnny, Penn State has had this massive advantage against one of their best opponents in the regular season. I mean, Auburn was a tough game that ended up definitely being aided by the whiteout, in my opinion, but Iowa was a cakewalk. Minnesota was a cakewalk. Who was the why am I blanking on who the official whiteout was? Washington. That was terrible. Like, it's been a while since Penn State has had this type of opportunity to have this kind of opponent in this kind of whiteout. So, I mean, just all the factors that go into it, whether it's on the field, whether it's recruiting, whether it's the business that's running through State College, Penn State, Pat Kraft, James Franklin, they've all clearly done some work on getting this to be a 7:30 game. And I think it's a huge win, a huge win for Penn State, and it's going to have a heck of a lot of eyes on Happy Valley in week 4 because, like I said, first time Penn State's going to be tested in the fall, and it's going to be a big test.
It is. And there are some changes, like I mentioned, with Oregon. Dante Moore is expected to take over as the quarterback, former 5-star. And so you don't have that stability with Dylan Gabriel. They don't have, guys like Derek Harmon in the middle of their defensive line. They don't have Tez Johnson, causing problems for Penn State on the outside at wide receiver. Jordan James, the running back, not with the team anymore. So, like, a lot of these guys, Oregon ranked among the top programs when it came to the 2025 NFL draft. Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, like, they lost double-digit guys in the NFL. So this is going to be a different team than what Penn State saw in Indianapolis in the Big Ten championship. And so I would give Penn State the edge in this game. Certainly, like, on paper, on a neutral field, I would give Penn State an edge. But I think with, the whiteout, I think that just amplified a little bit more. And so, yeah, huge news for Penn State. I don't know, like, I don't know where else to go with this, Max, other than, if you want to, I don't know. You have any other thoughts on this being the whiteout and any, like, I mean, I didn't see any other game that, like, there was no other game that jumped out in terms of the home slate that warranted it. Like, last year, like, I understand Washington was coming off the appearance in the national title game. That was a completely different team. And Illinois ended up being that quasi whiteout. Like, it just, I don't want to say it sucked because it was a whiteout, like, whiteouts are always cool experiences no matter what. But it was unfortunate for Penn State that they didn't get to use it on their biggest home opponent. So now that they get to, I'm excited about it, like, just from a lover of college football.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this is the first time in quite a while that Penn State's going to be able to use what is a tool in so many ways on and off the field as what it should be each year. Like last year, you mentioned Washington. Like, yeah, that was a completely different team. Not only did they lose the quarterback, 3 receivers, I think, from that national runner-up, like the head coach too was gone. So it was a completely different program. It was pretty easy to see on paper that that team was not going to be as competitive as it was 2 years ago. And the writing was on the wall with a good Penn State team playing in the whiteout. This year, it's a completely different thing, in my opinion, because sure, Oregon is very different. They've lost the quarterback. They've lost a lot of skill players, but it's still Oregon. It's still a perennial top 10, top 15 program, and it's still Dan Lanning at the helm. This is going to be a massive game. The only thing that I will add before we move on to talk some recruiting, Oregon will be tested a little bit more before Penn State heading into this game. They'll have played Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and Oregon State. Now, not world beaters by any means, but they are high major FBS competition that Penn State will not have on its schedule heading into that. That, in my opinion, can play a factor. I mean, coaches talk about it all the time, and it's not just coach speak. You have to be able to feel like a little bit of adversity before you're able to go in and play your best against a big opponent. So, credit to James Franklin. He usually has his guys ready for anything in every single week. I know that's gonna ruffle some feathers when we talk about Ohio State next year, but it's the truth. I mean, they handle low major teams like nobody's business, but they're gonna have to be able to do it against Oregon. That will come in slightly battle tested. But Johnny, I mean, we do it live. We do it live, and the Penn State whiteout in 2025 is against Oregon at night on NBC. It's great news, but let's go back to the point we were making about recruiting. This is an interesting official visit weekend. The class is really starting to round out already. We've talked about that a lot. There's a couple of names in this weekend specifically, if you want to touch on those. But I do just want to say we have a comment from Craig Nash over in Hollidaysburg. Appreciate you tuning into the show. He says, "How do you guys feel about Kari Adams and Luke Wafel committing?" I look, those are two really high profile prospects out there left in the cycle. It's tough when you've got not a ton of uncommitted guys at big positions of that caliber. Every school out there wants a piece at him. But I do think that Kari Adams left Penn State last weekend pretty impressed. I think that the Nittany Lions are in that one for sure. I maybe would venture to say favorites, but Kari Adams is definitely a name to watch. Luke Wafel, I'm waiting to see what the OV does for him. Let me check and remember when he's slated to visit. I don't know if you've got it off the top of your head, Johnny.
It's not this weekend. It's either next weekend or the weekend after.
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, I look, the thing that I will always go back to with Luke Wafel, and it is not an end all be all, but his brother's on campus, and it sounds like Owen Wafel is enjoying it so far. And the staff is happy to have him, and they've done well in New Jersey in the past. They've got really good roots in New Jersey. And if they were able to add both of those two players that we just talked about, I mean, this class is unbelievable. But for my 2 cents, Johnny, I think that it's not a guarantee by any means, but I feel pretty positive about both of those guys.
I think it's pretty clear that those two plus Joey O'Brien, arguably the number one player in Pennsylvania, the 4-star, 5-star defensive back from LaSalle College High School outside Philly here. Those three are probably Penn State's biggest targets left in the 2026 cycle. Toss in Dorian Barney as well, the 4-star corner from Georgia, who originally hails from Erie. So as we mentioned before, that's a best from PA, come back to PA situation. Those four guys, I think, would be Penn State's biggest targets. They're in on some 5-star guys as well. Emmanuel Iheanacho, there's Carter Meadows. Like there's some big fish still out there. But when you talk about regional, stars who have Penn State ties or who Penn State is clearly gone heavy on in trying to recruit. I mean, Terry Smith was down there in Maryland with Kari Adams prior to his official visit a couple weekends ago. So like they're spending the time, like their resources, their time, their effort on Kari Adams, on Luke Wafel, and Joey O'Brien, of course. And so I would expect, I don't know if getting 2 out of those 3 is a success. 1 out of 3, you need all 3. But it's very clear that they're high priorities for Penn State staff as they look to close out this class.
Yep. Next weekend is the visit for Wafel, as well as Carter Meadows and Jackson Ford, a Philly kid. Yep. Grayson McKeo. I hope I said that right. That's an offensive lineman who's a big one. So, these back-to-back weekends right now between the committed guys right this weekend and then next weekend, a couple of just flat out the top targets remaining on the board. There are, these are 2 back-to-back really big weekends for Penn State. So
Grayson McKeo a few days ago, by the way, I think it came out that his top 3 is Penn State, Notre Dame, and Texas. Notre Dame also very much in the mix on Joey O'Brien. Those 2 guys, both high school teammates at LaSalle. Something to keep in mind. I know Oregon is heavy on Joey O'Brien as well. So a chance for both of those LaSalle guys to follow the Abdul Carter path and come to Penn State. There's also a chance that both of them go to Notre Dame, the team that Penn State just lost to in the CFP semifinals. So something to keep in mind there.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I have talked about before, Johnny. Like having the Abdul Carter thing there is really big for Penn State and recruiting those guys. But it's even bigger if they're able to land those guys and turn them around to start building a pipeline in the LaSalle, in the LaSalle school and area, because guys who go there, sure, they've seen one guy graduate from Penn State and go to the NFL and be a top 5 pick. But if you start to see 2 or 3 guys from the school go get developed and become NFL players, it's going to become pretty hard to say no to a school that's done it so many times from your area. Let's get into the story that you wrote this week, Johnny. You put out a piece about remaining positions of need in this recruiting class for Penn State. So I'm going to give you the floor, but as we've said, like this is a class that really just has a great foundation. but there are some spots where could very clearly use some additions.
Yeah, we talk about that foundation first. So two quarterbacks in Troy Hun and Peyton Falzone. They're good there. Messiah Mickens at running back. Maybe add one more. Maybe we'll get to that in a second. Wide receiver, three already committed. I think they'd be comfortable with three. Obviously, they're after a fourth
Yeah.
in that group, but there's a couple of names to know there. Tight end, they don't have one yet. That's a spot to watch. Biggest thing though for me is the trenches on both sides of the ball. On offensive line, we talked about Marlon Bright, who is a 3-star, 4-star from New Jersey, who's visiting this weekend. And Penn State is hot on the trails. They've hosted him a bunch of times on campus. He could be added to that group. Grayson McKeo is one he's highly sought after by Penn State, Notre Dame, and Texas, but Penn State would love to bring him on. But currently, they've only got 2 offensive linemen in this class. Kevin Brown is a big one from Harrisburg, arguably the top player in the state. And then they've got Roseby Lubintis, 3-star offensive tackle, who seems like he's very much a project and is not a guy who would necessarily step in right away as even a second-year player and contribute. That could change, obviously. A lot can change. But the offensive line and what Phil outlined, it's nothing to be concerned about because there's a lot of names on the board and they're in on a lot of top prospects. But for me, offensive line is probably the biggest position of need right now in this group. And then edge rusher as well, which, we mentioned, or Luke Wafel. I keep wanting to say Owen Wafel. He's already at Penn State. Penn State would love to have both. We mentioned Carter Meadows, but defense and Jackson Ford, defensive end is another spot where I feel like Penn State, they've got their ducks in a row. They've got their targets, lined up. It's just a matter of bringing them in.
Yeah, you want another one or two defensive ends in this class for sure. And it's a bit of a different situation because the topic of our last live podcast, Daniel Jennings, obviously reclassified and came to 2025. So this is a group at defensive end that they, felt pretty good about, felt pretty solid in 2026. And you're able to move him up. And it kind of opens a hole, but maybe in a good way, because for some of those top prospects like Wafel or Meadows, they're not competing for playing time within their own class anymore. I mean, for some guys, that's a big deal. So, I think that once again, the Daniel Jennings thing is probably a overwhelming positive, and curious to see how it plays out. The offensive line of this group kind of reminds me of the 2024 cycle. I mean, if you think about the way that played out, they had commitments from a Michael Troutman and Owen Alicine. I'm going to forget other names that are on the roster right now that are just not on the present of mind, but they had some lower profile names committed at the bottom of the class. Then they go out late in the cycle and they pick up Malachi Goodman, and you say, wow, this is an offensive line class that has one or two names that are at the really high top end of, their recruiting class. They're guys that we feel really good about. And then you've got a couple of project pieces that you say, okay, they have the physical nature that Penn State sought out and got, and they could really develop right away. I mean, look at a guy like Owen Alicine, who did not play football for very long. He only played when he got to high school. He was a hockey player for a long time. The kid is 6'7", has put on a ton of weight, and got rave reviews in the spring. Malachi Goodman is just now getting to campus. He hasn't done anything, but they know that he's going to be a guy that they expect by next season to probably be in the fold. I mean, he's got the size, and, he was an All-American in high school and everything, but, that's a way to build an offensive line group every year because of the nature of the position where, guys don't really come in and play right away. Cooper Cousins is very much an outlier. Like that is just a really talented guy who was able to come in here and burn his red shirt. But you always want, a top end guy, and offensive line, as much as any position, is one where you can kind of project traits and develop, because it's tough to teach. And as long as you got the size, you can usually figure things out. So we'll see it. Brady O'Hara, that's another one who is a traits thing, because he was a tight end and they decided to move him over once he got here. He's getting to campus as well. So I think that there's no reason to panic with offensive line right now, especially because you got a guy like Kevin Brown, who is a heck of a player and going to be a heck of a player in college. but there's a lot of pieces out there, and they still need probably one more high profile addition up front. And but they do have Roseby Leventis, who is might be able to play that Alicine role, the Michael Troutman. They're lower profile prospects, but they come in and they get really good reviews from Phil Troutline once they get here. So it's interesting, but I'm with you. The trenches are really where this class could take another step forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned Cooper Cousins. Well, you just talked about the 2025 class. In 2024, like, Cousins coming in and being that anchor, that early commit,
Mhm.
really helped. And him being the top offensive lineman in the state and one of the best in the country. Well, Kevin Brown is kind of that similar deal, such an early commitment for this class. Best offensive lineman in the state, arguably the best player in the state.
Mhm.
And so having that as a literal anchor on a future offensive line, but also an anchor of the class, really helps when you're looking at the numbers right now and it's only two offensive linemen. On the defensive side of the ball, you're looking at two defensive linemen still in this class. You mentioned Daniel Jennings reclassifying. You've got Alex Haskell from St. Joe's Prep, who is a 3-star. But I mean, when you're a standout at St. Joe's Prep, and if you put on some good film as a senior, you're going to get bumped up to a 4-star if that is really a sticking point for some people. And then you look at Isaac Trikwara as well from Delaware. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I talked to Isaac recently. That's going to be a story soon on Penn Live. Just keep an eye out. But it's Chukara. The W is silent. So I made sure to ask him, and he was like, "Yeah, man, everybody asks me." I mean, of course, but Chukara is that's where we're at.
And I thought you talked to him, so I was kind of teeing you up there, and I'm glad that you delivered on that. I love
Appreciate
it.
it. Yeah.
He projects more of a D tackle, though, right?
That's correct. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a guy who spent pretty much all of his high school career playing defensive end, really. Really talented pass rusher. He's impressed at, the all 22 in State College last week, but Penn State staff has told him that they see him as a defensive tackle. And yeah, I mean, that's where he's at right now. But obviously you look at a guy like Zane Durant, he could still get after the passer from the interior. So maybe that's kind of how they project him.
Yeah, and so you basically got two defensive tackles, and you've got Jennings reclassified, so that opens up spots at edge. I mean, shoot, they could. I think they would still like to bring in another defensive tackle or two. You look at like a Damari Simeon from St. Augustine in New Jersey, Kashawn Stansel from North Carolina is another name to know there. But the edge group, there is a big group from which they're pulling.
Yes.
Wayful and Meadows are two top targets. Jackson Ford from Malvern is a top target. Even Ashton Blatt, from Central Catholic is a name to know. Tyson Harley from Gonzaga, same school as Carter Meadows, is a name to know there as well, another 4-star. So they've got a big group. Deion Barnes has a big group to pull from. It's just a matter of your priority, like who you're prioritizing. Wayful is priority number one, I think, in that group, and then kind of going on down from there. But I think they would love to have any combination of those edge rushers in this class. And Max, I think we've spent a good amount of time on the trenches, but there's still a couple of skill positions that I wanted to touch on. That in terms of like the number of spots that are going to be filled by offensive line and defensive line from the remaining spots that Penn State has in this class, I think a big chunk is going to come from the trenches, but I wouldn't be surprised if 1, 2, or 3 spots are also filled at running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And tight end is one that they don't have. They don't have a tight end in this class, which feels kind of odd, for the whole tight end the pipeline that Ty Howell has been able to develop, from over the last few years, and obviously the history there, going back to recently at least, Mike Gesicki and et cetera, et cetera. But they also have Luke Reynolds in the building as a second-year player. They signed Andrew Olesh, 5-star in last year's class, along with 2 others in Henderson and Kratovich. And so they signed 3 tight ends in the 2025 class. They got Luke Reynolds in the 24 class. Like, the urgency, that the actual need itself isn't necessarily there, but there's still a name or 2 out there that they would potentially like to bring in.
Yeah, you look at a guy like Max Sutter. He's one that they've been, done a couple of in-school visits with him, or more recently, a guy they've gotten on, Pierce Peterson, a Minnesota native. So, like, yeah, tight end is definitely not a position that you like say, wow, they are in desperate need of adding high-level recruits right now because, like you said, they have 3 freshmen who they all feel pretty good about, all 3, and a sophomore who is, probably going to end up being NFL draft bound after his junior year, but that's still a full another season that you get of a guy who you think is going to be a superstar. So it's not a desperate need, but you typically try and go out and add a player at every position in each recruiting class, at least. So with the way that they've recruited tight end over the past couple of years, I'm gonna go ahead and make an educated guess and say that one of those bigger name tight ends is gonna end up being a Nittany Lion before it's all said and done.
Yeah, and kind of similar deal at running back. They have Messiah Mickens from Harrisburg committed, and I know they're after heavily in on Brian Bonner from out in California. I think On Three has him ranked as their number 5 running back in the class. He's looking at some other West Coast schools as well. But if you miss out on him, and say Mickens is your only running back in this class, it's not the worst thing in the world, given what Stan Drayton already has in the room. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are gone after this year, but you have Cam Wallace in there as entering now his 3rd year. Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, a pair of high-level signees entering their 2nd seasons now. And then Tyke Hayes, who, early enrolled, and Jabri Wallace-Coleman from Imhotep, who will be coming in later this summer. And so it's a strong young nucleus already in the room. And then you're adding Messiah Mickens to that, assuming, he said he locked down his commitment. And we had a story, one of our high school team was able to speak to him recently. So check that out if you haven't already. But, assuming that holds true, I think they're fine at running back, but, they're always after the best players. And so if Bonner decides to come to Penn State, if that's where he wants to go, then they'll surely take him.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a situation where if they can go out and get another talented guy, they'll probably do it, especially if they've already been recruiting him for a while and a guy like Bonner. But you start to look at the future of this position, and it's a lot of mouths to feed. I mean, you mentioned all the names, but you don't want to forget about a guy that is, a couple years down the line, Keemon Spell, who obviously I talked to recently, but like he told me part of Penn State's pitch to him was, you're the only guy we want at this position in 2027. They want to make sure that he's the priority. They know that he's a heck of a ball player. And then, if you start to project the roster, the freshmen that are coming in this year, both those guys are really good. Tyke Hayes and Jabri Coleman are both really good running backs, and they're going to probably sit behind Corey Smith and Quentin Martin and maybe Cam Wallace if he comes back fully healthy, because Quentin Martin and Corey Smith are both really good running backs too. like it's just becoming a situation where their recruiting at running back has been so good that they're kind of like almost blocking themselves from getting more good players, because like it just becomes a lot of mouths to feed. And if we eventually do get to a point where we have to, Penn State has to consolidate to 105 players, like then if you have 7 running backs, like that's tough to sustain, So, I absolutely think that another running back could be in this class, but I don't think it's like you, Johnny. I don't think it's exactly a huge priority.
Yeah, and one other note on the running back bit, when we talk about building out that room and the job that they've been able to do, Jaywan Sider did some heavy lifting after, before leaving for Notre Dame, and now it's Stan Drayton's room. And, obviously the pipeline kind of speaks for itself, right? At least recently, Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders, Journey Brown, Nick Singleton. Look at Kamon Spell from McKeesport in the 2027 class. Messiah Mickens from Harrisburg in the 2026 class. 2025, it was Tyke Hayes from Aliquippa and Jabri Wallace-Coleman from Philly. So, like, they're keeping Pennsylvania's producing some pretty darn good running backs, and Penn State is just taking them every single time. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. So, Bonner out from California, like if he wants to, make that flight over to Happy Valley, I think they would take him in this class. But I don't think they're not in any desperate need whatsoever to add a running back elsewhere if it's not him. So, yeah, I think the last position before we wrap this out, Max, would be wide receiver, which, they got 3 in. 4-star Davion Brown from Virginia, LeVar Keys, and Jasir Rogers. Bringing that group to 3. I think they would like a 4th if it's the right guy, like Messiah Hampton, one of the best wide receivers in this class, number 1 player in New York. Just announced that his commitment date is coming up here in mid-June. Might be Oregon. It's looking like it might be Oregon. But if it's not Oregon and if it's Penn State, they would love to have him. There's a few other names out there too. But I think they'd be comfortable with it being this group of 3 if that's how it ends up. But there's still some stokes in the fire there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is, as we've seen, like with the transfer portal this year, even with recruiting last year, bringing in 4 guys, that position, until it's right, will just absolutely continue to take any and everybody they can get. Like if Penn State thinks you've got a chance of performing on a Big Ten stage, they're going to take you at wide receiver. I mean, that's just the truth right now, because there's a fair narrative around that room that needs to be changed. And so they're going to search far and wide and take any option they can get. Johnny, before we do send this out, I feel like I just have to say this. A lot of EA College Football 26 news dropping today. I know you and I are both avid players of the 25 version. However, James Franklin, man, they did him dirty. Like they did him dirty in that game. He does not look like James Franklin. I don't know if you saw my tweet, but I think he looks more like Dave Ramsey than James Franklin, the internet financial advisor, this mega superstar. He does not look like James Franklin.
It looks more like Darius Rucker to me. I was getting some responses to my tweet. I just took a screenshot of him in the trailer and tweeted it out. And some of the responses were Hootie and the Blowfish and all that. Like I can see it. Yep. I don't know which intern was on that one, but it's not great.
It's the goatee. It's way too thick, and the wiry glasses. It's just like it's not him.
It's a video game. It's a video game,
but go look at any major corporation RPG story video game. Their face scans are a heck of a lot better than what we're doing over there at EA right now. And that's not to say I'm not going to buy the game and I'm not going to play it, but come on, we can do better. We can do better than that. And also just a quick note off the beaten path of football, but the Penn State basketball season, the men's basketball team coming up this year might be a rough one. You diehards, I'll be covering it alongside for you, but Yannick Koenig-Niederhauser is staying in the NBA draft. It was the last decision Penn State really had for this 25-26 season. They are bringing in 5 freshmen in a pretty highly ranked class, but there is just not a lot of talent coming back from that team last year that already underperformed as it was, had a lot of injury issues. And so, like I said, I'll be covering it. I'll be sticking through it with you guys. But, for you Penn State basketball diehards, it might be a tough year. But Johnny, I think that's about it for today. No?
Yeah, I was going to say it's just with Yannick moving on, it's rough news.
Yeah,
for Mike Rhodes as he goes into his 3rd season at Penn State, and they were banking on him, to be a big part of this team. And without him, good luck covering that. It's gonna be tough. I mean, look, there's always hope springs eternal, all that kind of stuff. Especially with this class that they're bringing in, could be a fun watch, but less than ideal news, I would say.
It's like you want to be fun bad, but if you're going to be bad, you want to be fun bad and hope that some of these freshmen are going to be good in their sophomore and junior years. But the transfer portal even kind of takes out some of that excitement, because you worry if a guy really does show out on a bad team that he's getting poached right away. So props to any of you who are season ticket holders or watch every game, because I look. Not to be a doomer, but I just think it's going to be a rough watch in this coming season, unless there's some late movement in the transfer portal. But I think that's going to do it for us here on the Blue White Breakdown. Max, Ralph, and Johnny McGonigal on Penn Live. It was a was a big episode today, bigger than we were planning. Penn State whiteout has been set. It will be against Oregon here on September 27th in Happy Valley. It's a big one. More recruiting news, like we've said every week. It's going to keep coming this summer. That's what happens. And had a lot of chats today. We appreciate you guys. And yeah, if you're playing ESPN or EA CFB 26, just think of us and say that does not look like James Franklin. Take care.